My parents drained my $120,000 college fund to bankroll my golden child brother's $1 million startup. They told me I was smart enough to figure it out on my own. 10 years later, his company went up in smoke, taking their retirement with it. And guess who they begged for a bailout? Me. In every family, there is a dynamic that gets established early on and rarely shifts. In mine, the roles were cast in stone before I even reached middle school. My older brother, Derek, was the undeniable, untouchable golden child. I, Cleo, was the fiercely independent, self-sufficient afterthought. My parents, Arturo and Susan, weren't overtly cruel people, not in the cartoonish Cinderella stepmother kind of way. Their favoritism was far more insidious. It was wrapped in excuses, rationalizations, and backhanded compliments. Derek just needs a little extra help, Cleo. You're so smart, you never need us to hold your hand. That was the refrain of my childhood. If I got an A, it was expected. If Derek barely scraped by with a C-, it was cause for a celebratory dinner at his favorite steakhouse, because he tried his hardest. But the one thing I always clung to was the college fund. When my grandfather passed away when I was 10, he left a substantial sum of money to be split equally between Derek and me for our education. My parents put it into trust accounts. Over the years, they told me they were adding to it. By the time I was 18, my account was supposed to sit at a comfortable $120,000. It wasn't just money to me. It was my ticket out. It was freedom. I had spent 4 years of high school agonizing over perfect grades, joining every extracurricular activity I could stomach, and volunteering on weekends just to build a bulletproof resume. All that grinding paid off the day I received my acceptance letter to Georgetown University. It was my dream school. I remember holding that thick, glossy envelope in my hands, my heart hammering against my ribs. I ran downstairs to the kitchen, practically vibrating with excitement. Arturo and Susan were sitting at the island, nursing their morning coffees. Derek, who was 20 at the time and taking a gap year that had mysteriously stretched into 2, was lounging on the sofa playing video games. "I got in!" I yelled, slamming the letter onto the granite countertop. "Georgetown! I actually got in!" My mother offered a tight, brief smile. "That's nice, honey. Georgetown. Very prestigious." My dad didn't even look up from his tablet. "Good job, kiddo. Knew you could do it." The lack of enthusiasm was a gut punch, but I was used to it. "So, the tuition deposit is due in 2 weeks," I said, pulling up a chair. "I have the portal open on my laptop. We can transfer the funds from the college account today." The silence that fell over the kitchen was absolute. The only sound was the muffled explosions coming from Derek's video game in the living room. My parents exchanged a look, a very specific, loaded look that made the blood freeze in my veins. "Cleo, sit down," my dad said, his voice dropping an octave into his serious business tone. "I am sitting." My mother sighed, reaching out to pat my hand. I pulled it back. "We need to talk to you about the college fund," she began, refusing to make eye contact. "You see, Derek came to us a few months ago with a brilliant business proposition. A real game changer." Derek paused his game and sauntered into the kitchen, leaning against the doorframe with a smug, self-satisfied smirk. "It's a luxury lifestyle concierge app," he announced, "called Aura. We're going to disrupt the hospitality industry, connect high-net-worth individuals with exclusive experiences. It's a guaranteed gold mine." I stared at him, then at my parents. "Okay, what does Derek's app have to do with my Georgetown deposit?" My dad cleared his throat. "Startups require capital, Cleo. Seed money. Derek had a narrow window to secure the developers and launch the beta. He needed an angel investor. And? I asked, my voice trembling as the horrifying realization began to dawn on me. And we decided to invest in your brother's future, my mother said quickly, as if saying it fast would soften the blow. We liquidated the college accounts, both of them. We gave Derek the $240,000 as seed money for Aura. I felt the air leave my lungs. The kitchen tilted. You gave him my money? Granddad's money? My $120,000? It's not your money until you're 21, Cleo, my dad countered defensively. We are the custodians of the account, and as a family, we decided this was the best return on investment. Derek is going to give us equity. When the app goes public, we'll be able to pay for Georgetown 10 times over. He doesn't even know how to code, I screamed, standing up so fast my chair tipped over, backward, and clattered against the tile floor. He barely graduated high school. He dropped out of community college after 3 weeks because the parking was too annoying. You gave him my entire future for a pipe dream. Don't be dramatic, Cleo, my mother scolded, her lips thinning into a hard line. Derek is the man of the house. He needs to establish himself. You're a smart girl. You have a great GPA. You can take out student loans or go to the state school. You'll figure it out. You always do. I earned that money. Granddad left it for me. I was sobbing now, tears of pure, unadulterated rage blurring my vision. Derek rolled his eyes. Chill out, sis. I'll pay you back with interest when we hit our Series A funding. Don't be such a hater just because I have an entrepreneurial mindset. Looking at my family in that moment, I realized something that fundamentally changed me. They didn't care about me. Not really. I was a supporting character in the Derek show. My dreams, my hard work, my security. They were all entirely disposable if it meant propping up my brother's ego. I didn't say another word. I picked up my Georgetown acceptance letter, walked upstairs, and packed a single suitcase. I left the house that afternoon and moved onto the couch of my best friend's cramped apartment. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't go back for Sunday dinners. The betrayal severed whatever thin thread of familial duty I had left. They had made their choice, and I made mine. The next 6 years were a blur of sheer, unrelenting exhaustion. I couldn't afford Georgetown. Even with a partial scholarship, the living expenses and remaining tuition in Washington, D.C. were insurmountable without crippling private loans. Instead, I enrolled in a local state university. It wasn't glamorous, but it was pragmatic. To pay my way, I worked 2 jobs. By day, I was a full-time student, majoring in finance and risk management. By night, I waited tables at a high-volume diner downtown, and on weekends, I did data entry for a local logistics firm. I survived on cheap coffee, instant ramen, and an ironclad reserve of spite. Every time I felt like collapsing, every time I wanted to cry from the sheer exhaustion of working a Friday night shift until 3 a.m., only to study for an accounting final at 8 a.m., I pictured Derek's smug face. Spite is a highly underrated fuel source. While I was calculating margins and serving burgers to drunk college students, Derek was living the high life. Though I had blocked my parents and brother on most platforms, mutual acquaintances and extended family made sure I was kept in the loop. Derek's app, Aura, never truly launched in any meaningful way, but that didn't stop him from acting like the next Silicon Valley prodigy. He leased a white Maserati. He wore tailored suits and flashy Rolexes. He married a woman named Brittany, an influencer whose entire personality consisted of designer handbags and vague, pseudo-inspirational quotes about hustle culture. My parents were insufferable about it. According to my aunt, Arturo and Susan spent every Thanksgiving and Christmas bragging to the extended family about their visionary son, while casually dismissing my absence as me going through a rebellious phase. But I was busy building my own empire, brick by agonizing brick. During my senior year, I landed a coveted internship at Caldwell & Partners, a prestigious financial advisory and risk management firm. I worked like a dog, arriving before the senior partners and leaving long after the cleaning crew. My dedication caught the eye of the senior vice president, Thomas Henderson. Thomas was a tough, no-nonsense veteran of the financial world. He didn't care about pedigrees, he cared about results. When he realized I possessed a razor-sharp eye for spotting financial anomalies and mitigating corporate risk, he took me under his wing. Under Thomas's mentorship, I bypassed the usual entry-level grunt work. By the time I was 26, I was a senior analyst. By 28, I branched out, taking a massive leap of faith, and launched my own boutique corporate restructuring and wealth preservation firm. I was ruthless, efficient, and incredibly good at my job. By my 30th birthday, my firm had a 7-figure annual revenue. I owned a beautiful penthouse overlooking the city, and I was entirely self-made. I didn't owe Arturo, Susan, or Derek a single dime. Then came the crash. It happened in the late fall, exactly 10 years after I had walked out of my parents' kitchen. The facade of Derek's success finally shattered, and it brought the whole family down with it. I was sitting in my corner office reviewing a merger contract when my receptionist buzzed my intercom. "Ms. Cleo, I have a Susan and Arturo on the line. They say it's a family emergency, and they absolutely must speak with you." I paused, my pen hovering over the paper. My heart gave a strange, hollow thud. 10 years of virtual radio silence, save for a few passive-aggressive birthday texts. I pressed the button. Put them through. "Cleo!" Oh, thank God. My mother's voice poured through the speakerphone, thick with tears and panic. It wasn't the haughty, dismissive tone I remembered. It was the sound of a woman drowning. "Cleo, please, you have to help us. We didn't know who else to call. We're losing the house." I leaned back in my leather chair, staring out at the city skyline. What happened? The story poured out in a chaotic, hysterical rush, pieced together from my mother's sobbing and my father's defensive grumbling in the background. Derek's app, Aura, had never generated a single dollar of actual profit. The entire operation was a house of cards, funded initially by my stolen college fund and subsequently by massive, high-interest business loans. To keep up appearances, the Maserati, the luxury apartment, Brittany's designer lifestyle, Derek had been secretly shifting money from new investors to pay off the old ones. A classic, sloppy Ponzi scheme. When the investors finally demanded their returns, the bubble burst. Derek was slapped with multiple lawsuits for fraud. But that wasn't the worst part. He needed more capital last year to try and save the company. My mother sobbed. "We believed in him, Cleo. He's your brother. Your father and I, we co-signed the new loans. We put the house up as collateral." I closed my eyes. "How much, Susan?" I had stopped calling them Mom and Dad years ago. A heavy silence fell over the line. Then, my father's voice, raspy and defeated. 1.2 million. They were liable for $1.2 million. They had blown their retirement savings, my college fund, and leveraged the family home for a fraudster. And Brittany, the loyal wife, had already filed for divorce the second the Maserati was repossessed, taking whatever hidden cash Derek had left in offshore accounts. "We have 30 days before the bank forecloses on the house, Cleo," my mother pleaded. "We know you're doing well. We've seen the articles about your firm. You're an expert in debt restructuring. Please, you have to save us." I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of their desperation hang in the air. 10 years ago, they threw me to the wolves to buy Derek a crown he hadn't earned. Now, the wolves were at their door. "Come to my office tomorrow at 10 a.m., I said, my voice as cold and smooth as glass. "We'll see what can be done." I hung up the phone before they could thank me. I wasn't going to save them. I was going to teach them the hardest lesson of their lives. Promptly at 9:45 a.m. the next morning, my receptionist, Sarah Jenkins, buzzed my intercom. "Ms. Cleo, your family has arrived. I've placed them in conference room B, as you requested." "Thank you, Sarah," I replied, not looking up from the quarterly report I was annotating. "Offer them sparkling water. Let them wait." I let them sit in that glass-walled room for exactly 25 minutes. It was a calculated psychological tactic. In the world of high-stakes corporate restructuring, whoever controls the time controls the power dynamic in the room. When I finally walked through the heavy mahogany doors, I looked every inch the self-made executive I had become. Tailored charcoal suit, pristine blowout, and a chillingly calm demeanor. My parents looked small. It was the only way to describe it. Arturo, who had always commanded the dining room table like a feudal lord, was fidgeting nervously with his collar. Susan's usually immaculate makeup looked hastily applied, and she was clutching her designer handbag, likely a relic from their wealthier days, like a life preserver. Spread out on the massive oak table in front of them were 3 thick red manila folders. "Cleo," my mother exhaled, starting to stand up. She reached out, as if expecting an embrace. "Take a seat, Susan," I said smoothly, walking past her to sit at the head of the table. I didn't offer a hug. I didn't smile. I flipped open the first red folder. "We have a lot of ground to cover, and I have a hard out at 11 for a conference call." My father cleared his throat, trying to summon some of his old patriarchal authority. "Now, Cleo, let's not make this colder than it needs to be. We're family. We're in a bit of a tight spot, and—" The conference room doors banged open, interrupting him. Derek swaggered in. He was wearing a designer hoodie and aviator sunglasses, which he slowly took off, surveying my luxurious office with a mixture of envy and defensive arrogance. Even facing down the barrel of financial ruin, he couldn't drop the act. "Wow, little sis. Moving up in the world," Derek said, dropping into the leather chair next to my mother and kicking his feet up onto the table. "Nice digs. Looks like the little nerd made good. So let's wrap this up. My lawyer is waiting on a retainer check, and I'm assuming Mum and Dad told you about the First National Bank situation? Just cut the check to my LLC, and I'll handle the creditors." I stared at his Italian leather loafers resting on my custom-built table. "Take your feet off the furniture, Derek, or I will have security physically throw you out of this building." He blinked, taken aback by the ice in my voice, and slowly lowered his legs. "Now," I said, folding my hands on top of the files, "let's talk about reality, because it seems none of you have lived in it for the past decade." I opened the second folder. Over the last 48 hours, my forensic accounting team ran a complete audit on Aura and your personal finances. Derek, you didn't just fail. You actively committed wire fraud. You took investment capital from Piedmont Sovereign Bank and transferred $400,000 of it into an offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands, managed by a proxy named Richard Sterling. You used fresh investor money to pay off the interest on your parents' co-signed loans to keep the bank off your back just long enough to secure more funding. Derek went completely pale. The smug aura evaporated instantly. How How do you have that information? That's private financial data. I am a licensed corporate risk manager, and I have friends at the SEC, I stated coldly. But that's not even the interesting part. The interesting part is the $1.2 million debt hanging over Arturo and Susan's heads, secured by the family home. My mother leaned forward, tears welling in her eyes again. Cleo, please. The bank sent the foreclosure notice. We have 3 weeks before we are evicted. You have millions. We've read about your company's success in the Wall Street Journal. You can make this go away. I can, I agreed, but I'm not going to write you a check. My father slammed his fist on the table. Listen to me, young lady. We are your parents. We raised you. We gave you everything. You gave Derek everything, I corrected, my voice deadly quiet. You stole $120,000 of my grandfather's money, my future, my safety net, to fund a con artist. You told me to figure it out. You told me I was smart enough to survive on my own. Well, you were right. I did figure it out. I worked night shifts until I was shaking from exhaustion. I built an empire from absolutely nothing. And now you want to use my empire to shield yourselves from the consequences of your own favoritism. We made a mistake, Susan sobbed, burying her face in her hands. We admit it. Derek made mistakes. But you can't just let us be thrown out onto the street. You have to save the house. Oh, the house is perfectly safe, I said, leaning back in my chair. A slow, terrifying realization began to dawn on my father's face as I slid the 3rd red folder across the table toward him. What is this? Arturo asked, his hands trembling as he opened it. Yesterday afternoon, my firm, Hayes Financial Restructuring, approached First National Bank, I explained, savoring every single syllable. They were holding a portfolio of toxic, distressed debt, including your heavily defaulted mortgage. They were thrilled to offload it for pennies on the dollar to clear their books before Q4. Derek gaped at me. You bought our debt? I bought the debt, I confirmed, smiling for the first time since they walked in. Which means First National Bank is no longer foreclosing on your home. I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was deafening. I am. The reaction was explosive. My mother shrieked, a raw sound of absolute disbelief and betrayal. My father knocked his chair backward, standing up with a face as red as a brick. You can't do that, he roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. That is our home. That is where you grew up. It's an asset, I replied clinically. And as the primary lion holder, I am exercising my right to liquidate the asset to recover the outstanding balance. The eviction notice you received from First National is null and void. The new one, issued by my legal team, gives you exactly 14 days to vacate the premises. You vindictive little... Derek started, lunging forward across the table. Before he could reach me, the heavy conference room doors opened. My firm's head of security, a massive former Marine named David Mitchell, stepped inside, crossing his arms. Derek froze, slowly backing away. You're a monster, my mother whispered, looking at me as if she had never seen me before in her life. How could you do this to your own flesh and blood? Over money? It was never about the money, Susan, I said softly. It was about respect. It was about accountability. You gambled my life away on the golden child. Now the game is over, and the house always wins. What about me? Derek demanded, his voice cracking with genuine panic. Cleo, the investors are talking to the feds. Brittany left me. I have nothing. You bought the debt, so you control the narrative. You have to hide the Cayman Island transfers. You have to cover for me. I looked at my brother. For the first time in my life, I didn't see the untouchable prodigy my parents had worshipped. I saw a pathetic, cowardly fraud. I am a fiduciary, Derek. It is literally illegal for me to hide financial crimes, I said, standing up and buttoning my suit jacket. In fact, I am legally obligated to report suspicious findings during an audit of acquired assets. My team forwarded the Cayman Island routing numbers to the Securities and Exchange Commission at 8 a.m. this morning. Derek's knees buckled. He actually collapsed back into his chair, putting his head between his knees, hyperventilating. "Get out of my office," I said, my voice ringing with finality. "And don't ever contact me again." The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely public. 14 days later, true to my word, the authorities escorted Arturo and Susan off the property. I didn't keep the house to gloat. I immediately put it on the market, sold it to a nice young couple, and used the profits to reinvest in my firm's commercial real estate portfolio. With no retirement savings, no home, and no credit, my parents were forced to downsize drastically. They ended up renting a cramped, two-bedroom apartment in a noisy, run-down suburb on the outskirts of the city. My father had to come out of retirement and take a job as a greeter at a local hardware store just to make rent. The country club memberships, the bragging at Thanksgiving dinners, the illusions of grandeur, it was all gone. But Derek got hit with the heaviest karma of all. Armed with the forensic data I had provided, federal prosecutors descended on Aura like vultures. Derek's attempt to play the naive, struggling entrepreneur fell apart when they traced the offshore accounts. He was indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud and embezzlement. He didn't have the money for a high-powered defense attorney, and a public defender could only do so much against a mountain of irrefutable paper trails. Derek pleaded guilty to avoid a 10-year sentence. He served 36 months in Allenwood Low Federal Correctional Institution. When he was released, he was a convicted felon with millions in court-ordered restitution hanging over his head. The tech world wouldn't touch him. The corporate world wouldn't touch him. The last I heard through the grapevine, the former million-dollar startup genius was working the graveyard shift as a forklift driver at an Amazon fulfillment center in New Jersey, having a percentage of his meager paycheck automatically garnished by the government every week. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on the balcony of my penthouse, looking out over the glittering city skyline with a glass of expensive wine in my hand. I think about my grandfather and what he would say if he could see me now. I lost the $120,000 he left me, but the betrayal taught me a lesson far more valuable than any college fund. I learned that nobody is coming to save you. I learned that you have to be your own white knight. I didn't seek revenge. I merely stepped aside and let them face the consequences of their own actions. And in the end, I didn't just survive the fire they threw me into. I became the owner of the match factory. Thank you for listening to my story. Sometimes, the hardest lessons in life come from the people who were supposed to protect you, but true power lies in building your own success. If you enjoyed this story of karma and accountability, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life drama and storytelling.